It's a form of prostitution that has been given a get out of jail free card because it presents itself as anything but. And we need to look behind it, and we need regulation of this site, and we need to shut this site down.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. Today we're going to be talking about Lily Phillips. She is an OnlyFans creator, and a documentary recently was published where a camera crew followed her having had sex with 100 men in one day. Here's a clip of Lily straight after it happened.
It's not for the weak, girls, if I'm honest. It was hard.
But
I don't know if I'd recommend it.
why not?
I think if you're a different type of girl, it's very like... It's kind of like being a prostitute in a sense of like, it's just a different feeling. I don't know how to explain it, like...
It's not like just having sex with someone.
Yeah. Just one in, one out, like it feels intense.
Like more intense than you thought it might.
Definitely.
It's
Sorry.
okay. It's okay. Just take
Yeah, 1 minute.
It's caused a massive debate online, and a lot of people are wondering, is Lily Phillips a victim? To discuss this, I'm joined by Julie Bindel, a writer and feminist campaigner for decades. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today on Spectator TV. What were your thoughts on that clip?
Well, Lily Phillips, like any woman providing porn content or prostitution content on OnlyFans, is making money from so-called fans, men, punters I would call them, who pay to view. And she had sex with 100 men as a gimmick, as a money-making gimmick. She then was filmed on a YouTube hour-long so-called documentary. And as I'm sure everyone can see, whatever position they take on pornography and prostitution and this kind of sexual exploitation, she looks utterly traumatised.
And I suppose these girls that have OnlyFans accounts, they don't see themselves as prostitutes. And one of the things that was interesting in that clip is when she was getting upset, she was saying it was kind of like prostitution. Were you surprised that they would completely separate themselves from being paid for sex?
Not at all. I've been studying the sex trade, and I've interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of women involved in it, or who have left, or who are trying to leave, or who say they're perfectly happy within it. And I've also interviewed dozens of Johns, of punters, of men who pay for sex, and also pimps and brothel owners and the like. And really, most people want to separate themselves from this business. So the pimps will say that they're managers. The webcam profiteers, and I would say that OnlyFans is just webcam sex, also pretend that it's about something different. It's more like modelling and appreciating a fine-looking woman. For the women themselves, there is a kind of gradation of abuse that they, I suppose, talk themselves into coping with. So women who work from high-class hotel rooms will say that it's way better than working in some scuzzy brothel that masquerades as a massage parlour. The women that are in the massage parlours say, well, it's better than working on the street. The women on the street say, well, at least we can run away, and at least we're our own bosses. But in fact, there's always a pimp or a profiteer of some kind hanging around, whether it's a drug dealer or someone who owns the technology, somebody that takes a cut from the earnings. And prostitution is so horrible and so degrading for the women that they, of course, want to distance themselves from that label. And you can see it even in countries such as the Netherlands, where prostitution has been legal for 24 years now, brothel prostitution and the like. And the women are supposedly given workers' rights and they pay tax. Less than 5% of the women in prostitution actually sign up as being prostitutes, as being involved in the sex trade, because of course it's a clandestine industry, it always will be, and the women don't want to be labelled as such.
It has caused a massive debate online with a lot of people saying that this is Lily Phillips's decision. She earns a lot of money from it. But in your piece on Coffee House, what you've written about is you've shone the light on actually the responsibility on the men who have signed up to having sex with her. Why is it that you think that the men should feel a responsibility for what's happened?
Because the men know that she doesn't want sex with them. Because the men know that she was having sex with 100 men in 24 hours. And that means a brutal punishment of her body and her mental health. No woman wants sex with 100 men in 24 hours. It's not what our bodies are made to be able to endure. That the health consequences are so grim that it's actually pretty impossible to talk about it here, because it's so distressing what happens to women who I've spoken to, who are in brothels, who are compelled to have sex with 8, 10, 12 men a day. The punishment is terrible. So these men know, whatever she is saying, that she doesn't want this sex, that she's not enjoying this sex. And yet they go ahead and do it. And why you would want one-sided sexual pleasure is a question all men should ask themselves. Now, the other thing that we need to look at is to tackle this wealth creation myth. So lots of the abuse that I've had online since the piece was published, and some under-the-line comments on the article on Coffee House, are quite extraordinarily misogynistic. Why? Why is it that men in the main, but some women, want to put all of the emphasis on a woman's so-called choice? We hear this all the time. We never hear the word empowerment ascribed to something men do. You know, go and have a round of golf. It's empowering. It's only ever about women who are doing things that degrade her. So the myth of OnlyFans is one that's often pushed by the media. It's part of its uncritical misrepresentation of OnlyFans. It supposedly offers young women a get-rich-quick solution. It's indirect sexual content. So in other words, there's no prostitution involved. This is nonsense, because it ignores the hellish exploitation, not just sexual, but economic, that occurs at every level of this transaction. 73%, and this is based on figures from OnlyFans itself back in 2022, of the entire income generated by the site goes into the hands of 10% of its creators.
Wow.
So that leaves 90% of the creators to split 27%. And often there's a middle person there taking part of that remaining profit. It's just an extension of webcamming, as I say. But I'll say one thing about the abuse that I've had since I published this piece. Very, very angry men asking, how dare I suggest that Lily isn't happily doing this? And in fact, she's the exploiter. She's the one that's driving this. Well, it's clearly a gimmick for profit. And, you know, the other thing I suppose is worth mentioning is it's back to the old-fashioned misogyny from openly sexist men, which is quite kind of going back to the old days. Because for so long I've just had so-called progressive men screaming at me that I'm a transphobe. So that was something that was quite eye-opening. The misogyny is off the scale, and that means the misogyny towards the women providing the content is also off the scale.
On that, I just wondered about you've interviewed several women in the past that have worked in this, that have been sex workers, and I think even the people that are very sympathetic towards the issues of the sex trade, especially for women, might be thinking, what is it that possessed Lily to do this? And following this documentary that was released, and I watched it recently, she's since said, I now want to do this again with 1,000 men in 24 hours. Julie, having spoken to so many women in this sex trade, what leads them to doing something that you believe that they don't want to do?
You can get 3 months of The Spectator for just £15, plus a free bottle of Paul Roger champagne if you go to spectator.co.uk/fizz24. This offer is UK only and subject to availability.
Well, of course she doesn't want to do it. There is no woman on this planet who would want to have sex with 100 men, 1,000 men, which is physically impossible. She'd be dead at the end of that. It's just not true. And I will be accused of ascribing a false consciousness to women. Everybody listening to this, every woman, every man will know this isn't something any human being would want to do. What Lily wants is to make money. She wants to be unique. She possibly even wants attention. Who knows? I'm not a psychologist and I don't know her. But anyone who would pretend that this is something that she would enjoy is deluding themselves. And so we have to look at platforms such as OnlyFans. There is a sanitized version, as I say, of webcamming, of straightforward direct prostitution, with lots of direct prostitution involved. One woman that I interviewed who'd been on the site told me at first it was brilliant. There was a little bit of semi-nudity and I was earning a fair bit. But then I came under pressure to film myself in pornographic poses and even having sex with a girlfriend. That's when I got really upset and disabled my account. Now, that's a story I've heard from several other women. I've heard from women who've been stalked by the fans, the men, the Johns, when they have, given them increased amounts of money to do more and more sexually exploitative and even dangerous things. And so it's a form of prostitution that has been given a get out of jail free card because it presents itself as anything but. And we need to look behind it, and we need regulation of this site, and we need to shut this site down.
And the other interesting thing that I saw in the documentary is Lily mentioned, I mean, she's clearly a very astute businesswoman because she employs 9 people. And I wondered if maybe she feels a responsibility towards the people that that work for her, and the sex trade has taken on a whole new different business model where the pimps aren't necessarily the people that employ her, but she employs them. And I wondered if the people around her are looking after her safety.
Of course not, because it's about profit. I wish that Lily and other women who are promoting OnlyFans as though it's a great get-rich-quick scheme would stop doing that. But I'm not going to blame her. I'm not going to point the finger at her and say this is all her fault. Yes, of course, you can look at the fact that she has promoted OnlyFans in a way that will encourage other women to be involved. But you can say that about any woman in the sex trade or the porn industry who's saying, hey, it's great, come on in, the water's lovely, you make loads of money, the men are all lovely, and then, you can go off and buy yourself a house in the Cotswolds. Yes, of course, women are going to say that. Lily is one of a rare example of those that we get to hear about in the mainstream media because of this extreme exploit, because of the publicity around this extraordinary, horrific competition, goal she set herself. But she is an exception that proves the rule that OnlyFans is an exploitative site, and performers can very rapidly earn money, and then their money always decreases for content they've produced when they first start out on the site. So they then have to engage in more and more extreme sex acts and sexual stimulation in order to keep the fans paying. And this is exactly what happens in any type of prostitution or pornography consumption. The acts become more extreme, and that means there's more danger and harm to the women.
One other thing that really stood out to me, Julie, was all of these various requests that Lily gets on the app, and she has to cater to all these various needs and wants by the men that are paying her.
If a man is paying a woman for any kind of sexual service, whether it's from behind a screen or direct, then they believe that they can ask for what they want. Many of the men that I've interviewed who are prolific brothel users of prostituted women will say the reason they go to women selling sex is so they can get what they want, something that their girlfriends and wives don't want to do. Degrading, painful, harmful sexual acts that leave trauma, both physical and mental. I'm not surprised at any of it. And this is why the onus has to be on the men. I'm not suggesting that Lily is helpless, has absolutely no agency whatsoever. I'm not suggesting that she has been forced or had a gun held to her head. But come on, let's look a little bit behind these headlines. See a young woman who is harming herself, and it's clearly self-harm, and the men involved as punters, as those willing to have sex with her, are compounding that harm and causing her great physical and mental damage. And they need to look at themselves. If you imagine why a man would want to have sex with a woman where 50, 60, 70 men have been before in the immediate instance, and know how desperately upset and damaged she must be, how can they possibly go through with it? This is why the onus has to be on the men.
I've one last question, Julie, and it's about a lot of the feedback you've received for your piece. I know you spoke earlier about a lot of the very misogynistic comments from men responding to your article, and I'd ask our viewers to go and have a read because it's very interesting. But having worked in the industry for 20 odd years, I noticed a lot of women's responses to you were really quite harsh online, and I wondered, have women since the sexual revolution become more abusive towards you with your argument, where they sort of want to tell you that it's their right, or it's women's rights to be able to carry out these sorts of sexual acts?
There are some women that call themselves feminists that are not, who talk about nothing but women's right to be abused, women's right to be exploited in this way, and seem to think that feminists like me have the power to tell women that they shouldn't do it. I wouldn't dream of telling a woman what she should or shouldn't do, can or can't do with her body. I'm interested in looking at how men can do this to an abused woman who's clearly hurt, clearly in pain, clearly vulnerable. But yes, women often turn on other women and defend men to the hilt when it comes to the rights that they believe they have to do what they want with women's bodies. And that's always been the case. But the misogynistic comments I've had from men, they're just so straightforwardly old-fashioned, like I say. You're too ugly to, and then add the expletive. No wonder an old spinster like you is jealous of someone like Lily. At least men want her, but they don't put it quite as politely as that. And really nasty abuse. And it's water off a duck's back for me. I've had this for decades because I've been talking about men's sexual violence and the responsibility that men need to take. But what I'm interested in is looking at what motivates men to want to have sex with a woman who doesn't want sex with him. And that's clearly the case with Lily. I'm not suggesting, as I say, she has a gun held to her head. Surely we can look at consent in a way that's a little more nuanced and obvious than that.
Julie Bindel, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV.
Thank you.